Okay, let's take a look at Espana 1936. This is that's kind of interesting to me. It's a game, and I may keep the box lid because you roll a bunch of dice in this game. It's a game that I guess kind of caught my eye early on in my return to gaming. It had just come out not long before. I came back around 2009, and it was published in English, I think, in 2008. So it had a lot of buzz going about it. I didn't have anything on the Spanish Civil War, and it seemed like a cool idea to pick this up. It wasn't. It was in the moderate range of ratings, which you might say, well, now wait a minute, why would you touch moderate range things? Well, what I got to tell you is most of the games that I like ended up in the moderate range of things at that time period, and although, well, most of the war games I liked ended up in the moderate range. The ones that were super popular and really high on the ranking, generally I kind of didn't like them as much. They were either too simple, too CDG-ish, whatever. Unfortunately, just because something's in the moderate range doesn't mean it's necessarily in my wheelhouse. And this has just kind of sat on my shelf with not exactly disdain, just sort of it's another bubbled map with, a simple looking combat system, etc. I can just put it off. Well, I'm kind of in the mood to do something like this. Unfortunately, the rulebook's a little bit more complicated, and the setup is painful. Basically, what you have to do is, this is like, a Euro setup or something. You have to match the stuff on the pictures. There is no, at least I don't think, they didn't refer me to any. There is no setup that is just a list, which would be much, much more useful. There's some other issues with the counters, etc., that, approaching it immediately kind of bother me. I have to go by the image on the counters to understand what type of unit's what type of unit. Boy, is that kind of obnoxious. My eyesight's not very good, and seeing imagery type things isn't very easy. It's especially hard when you got counters like this. Most of the counters of this type are double-sided, whatever. But these guys on the other side have regulars, and I don't think that's a misprint. I think it's to provide you with enough regular 5-point units. I think it's a countermix, an intentional countermix setup, but that's not really called out in the rules. Long after and by the way, I'm not playing anything big because I'm expecting a Kickstarter game to show up that I'm supposed to review. Kind of came out of nowhere, but it looked interesting. And I started getting messages of, did you get the game yet? As if it's, was put in the mail or supposed to be. So I don't know what's going on with that, but that's why you've been seeing me play nothing but shorter things. I was kind of looking at Pendragon and saying, that's a bit much to enter into. Well, this ended up, after working through the rules, a bit more than I expected. I only have one other, well, I have a couple other games on the entirety of the Spanish Civil War. I've only played one other, which was Popular Front. I did that as a review. And I have to say that felt a bit too much like it was, well, it had like a deterministic combat system or something like that. And it just really didn't work for me. It felt like I was just bidding throughout the entire game. And kind of like anything you did, the question is, do you counteract what the other person does, or is there something more valuable that you can go after? And he made a mistake, and therefore he should respond to what you're doing, maybe to catch up or whatever. That was kind of a that kind of game does not thrill me. You could say there's kind of a Go-like aspect to it, but it really didn't have it. It was. It's one of the problems I think I had with some of the stripped-down CDGs too, where it's like, well, I got points, I can put them, you know, to respond to where the other guy's going, or I can go after my own things, and one of those choices is the right choice, and it's just that simple because there's not much luck involved in it. Well, with here, there's going to clearly be a decent amount of luck, therefore it might actually be a reasonable simulation, because in warfare, nothing is certain. And so any military situation that uses a deterministic system is very suspect at the least. Anyway, let's take a look at what we have. We have hordes of different kinds of units. The blue and green are the nationalist side of things. The Republicans are all red. You have little control counters for when nobody's present in an area. The advanced rules add navies. The game looks pretty simple until you hit them. You have airplanes and tanks. Tanks here, airplanes here. You have leaders, who are these things, all named leaders. Normal bubble map with connections between things. Some of those connections may look like they should exist. So for example, what the fuck's going on here? I can't go from here to here. Can't go from here to here. I mean, basically, it's like a daisy chain with an impassable barrier in the middle. Is that real? I don't know what it's trying to represent, but when I see shit like that, I start scratching my head and saying, what it's probably, the cause of it all is that they've got only a singular transition line, that theoretically there should be some way to connect across the middle somehow, but it would be too difficult for, you know, your normal movement, so you'd need some other kind of movement for it. But I feel like I'm losing out on some sort of you know, real connection that's geographically there and that I would be able to exploit. It always just troubles me when I see these area maps, not area maps, these point-to-point maps, because I just don't really trust the design decisions that go behind them. I feel like I'm being limited in certain ways. We have naval operation areas, and again, the naval rules are the advanced game. There's also a set of optional rules which come in before the advanced game. We're going to be playing with most of the optional rules, the advanced game, and yes, it's my first try. My feeling is, and they say don't do this, of course, but you know, my feeling is I kind of understood the ground game just by reading the rules, I think, but I didn't really get a good feel for the naval game by reading the rules. And the naval rules are always my bugaboo, which I've said before. The other thing you have is cards. Those cards serve two purposes in this game. They, not quite like a CDG, they can be used to trigger the event that's on them. And there's a specific time in each turn when you're allowed to play events. It's not just kind of, you know, as per the card or anything like that, where you can play them in general. Nor are you playing the cards to activate your units or anything like that. The other thing that the cards are good for is they have a modifier to combat die rolls. So if you're involved in an important battle, you might choose to forego an event and play the thing. Each player has their own deck, and the decks are divided by years. So this is the early war stuff, and then there's a later war deck as well. All right, I think that's enough about, oh, how about a couple more component things? Each player has a player aid mat, which gives a place to store planes and generals, which kind of come off the map at the end of each turn, and track replacement points, which I think get eaten at the end. I think you have to eat them all. I think they use them or lose them, but I'm not positive. Sequence of play listed here. The red stuff is for the advanced game. Although I don't know if all the red stuff is. I haven't really paid attention to it that much. That's the only place where you'll find the consolidated sequence of play is on the player aid card. It doesn't show up in the rules. In the rules, they have the basic sequence of play. And then they have a, insert these things for the naval game. Always iffy. This is a game that has basically 3 sets of rules. Well, more than that if you count all the permutations. But I mean, it's got a set of basic rules, that's the simple land game, and then a set of optional rules that kind of can apply to either the basic or advanced game, so you can jump into the basic game with them right away. And then there's the naval rules. I don't know how much I find that terrible, but I always kind of like the rules just to be consolidated. But that's because I like playing things with what the designer believes is the most historically accurate version of the game. Some of the options, though, allow you to fiddle around with the scenario. So like one of them allows you to stack the deck, so you get a historical sequence of cards. Okay. And then you have a battle aid chart. The battle is not quite Axis and Allies here. It's actually aligning units and rolling against them, and we'll get to that in a moment. A lot of time is spent, not too much, I guess, explaining the different types of the different pieces in the game. There are automatic victory conditions, which at the end of each turn are checked. And if somebody's won by the automatic victory conditions, the game's obviously over. Otherwise, it goes to the end of turn 10. And basically, whoever controls the most important cities, which I believe are these yellow ones. You can see how well I remember things. Basically wins. Okay. A few concept of supply. Units in supply as long as it's connected to a friendly or contested adjacent box. So the only way you're not in supply is to be completely surrounded and isolated. And if you're out of supply, what happens? Well, you can't move, you can't attack, and you can't get replacements and reinforcements unless a card specifies that it works even when you're out of supply. And this is kind of interesting because it doesn't have like that starvation effect that out of supply has. The unit is able to maintain its existence as a function unit, even if you cut it off from the military supply. It doesn't have a matter of time to get back into supply or anything. Okay. Here's the sequence of play. Let's go through it briefly. The first thing is you're going to be drawing 3 cards from your deck. However, on turns 1 and 6, you're going to start with a bigger hand of 6 cards. Then normally, each player, starting with the nationalist, will be able to move their ground units and assign planes to locations on the board. Then, starting with the nationalists, now this I believe is alternating. Each player places a general down in a location. You can only have 1 general per location. You're not going to be allowed to attack without a general, and there's a fairly limited number of them. So, this kind of represents the limited amount of actions you can take that a CDG would give you. Instead, what you have is a limited number of places where you can launch an offensive. Then you'll resolve the actual combat. Upkeep, I don't know what the fuck happens there. I think it's just counting how many areas you have, stuff like that. Then each player is going to be allowed to play up to 3 events from their hand. Now, you had the option to play some of these cards during the combat. Now you have the additional option to throw them down and get the events, which might create new units, might create issues that are very appealing. I haven't looked at them. I like such cards to be a surprise, and yes, they're fully shuffled. They're not stacked. Stacking them is, you know, an option. Then the replacement phase. Turns with R's, you're going to get replacement points, equal, I believe, to the number of key cities that you control or contest, which means if you're battling in them, both players get points to support that battle. And for the most part, you can recover you can recover steps for a point each. Navies work similarly. Then you have to discard down to an 8-card hand. As soon as cards are played or discarded, they're gone from the game forever. You get one shot to use them. That's it. And then you go to another turn. Okay. We talked about supply already. Movement. So base movement is you can walk as far as you like, as long as you don't enter a space that's enemy controlled or contested. But as soon as you enter a space that's enemy controlled or contested, you stop. However, tanks are not forced to end their movement in an adjacent box when they leave. Oh, yeah. So if you started in a contested box, you can only move one box out of it, no matter what. Tanks are not forced to end their movement in an adjacent box, though, when leaving a contested box. And you can't leave a contested box if you're the last unit there. Basically what this means is you're going to have a fair amount of ability to kind of slip into the other player's lines and contest whatever the hell you want, but you can't just zip around with no impediment at all, except within friendly territory if you didn't start in a contested space. If you leave a space that you're the last unit leaving it, you put one of your control markers down to indicate that you kept it. And you remove control markers as you enter. You can only move each unit once per phase, and here's the thing. I made a mistake there. Okay, so if you move into a space with an enemy control marker in it, you stop, but the control marker is now removed and it's a friendly controlled space, so now your other units, which move sequentially, are able to move through it. That was the thing I wanted to point out, but it only was vaguely in my head. Now there was something else I was there. Yeah, each unit can only move once. The order of the movement is of some importance, and they make a suggestion, tilt your counters or whatever, to remind you that you've moved them, because that's the only way you're going to remember. There's a special movement coming from Morocco. The airlift and sea lift is a special case for the nationalists. Units in Morocco can only be moved out of it at the end of the upkeep phase, over here. So it's not really even movement. Before the event card is played, you can move 3 units per turn, 1 to Seville and 2 to Cadiz. And you can only do it if there's a nationalist unit or marker that includes a control marker in that city. So you can enter basically you can't enter it if it's Republican controlled. Morocco is going to be a port. Ports affect some of the event cards. They also affect the naval units. Generals in Morocco cannot be assigned to boxes until they're taken out and move into the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, do they count as one of the things that I'm allowed to move? It says units. I don't know that leaders appear to be under the combat units thing. So yeah, I think you have to expend to move them out, which makes sense. And then they're on the main map and able to be used. After that, you're allowed to drop planes where you like. Since planes can fly, in general, you can drop them anywhere where you have pieces. When the battles are concluded, they go back. Now, on the first turn of the game, all the planes that start on the map are stuck where they are, or they can be moved to spaces that they could move to using land movement. Now, I believe they're all in places. Oh no, this one is here. A lot of them are in places where they're already in a combat situation, which means they're not going to. They can only move one space anyway. This guy's pretty free, but he's limited to here, 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 and then blocked off. So, just for the first turn of the game, though. Then you're allowed to assign generals. Like I said, you alternate those. And there can only be one general on each side in a stack. Now, somewhere I have, yeah. So on the first turn of the game, generals that are already on the map, instead of being in the player's map, during the first turn, these can only be assigned using the rules for ground movement, same as the planes can. Otherwise, again, you can just drop them wherever they like, because if you look at the turns, they're fairly long, you know, say a season each, and there's time to fly somebody in and take over the new command, etc. in that period of time. All right, let's look at combat. Once the generals have been assigned, combat can be initiated, starting with the nationalist player. Each side in turn will select one of its generals and decide whether the general is activated for attack or not. If the general initiates a battle, you'll go to combat resolution. Otherwise, you flip it over inactive, and you've passed for that. You can go to another general later. This is repeated until both players have used all their generals. If somebody still has some left, they can then use them all at the end, in whatever order they like. Battles can only be initiated if there's an active general in the box. Combat happens between the opposing troops. Well, it says opposing units. It's opposing troops. You have to have troops present to fight on either side, in fact. Each unit can only attack once per turn, but when a box has been activated for combat, everything in that box can participate in the battle in different attacks. The attacking player is not forced to attack with all the units present in the box that he activates. Generals who are out of supply cannot initiate a battle. However, they can still be activated and flipped over as a pass. Supply status might change during the battles, so you may not want to do that. And they still have their die roll modifier effect on battle. Combat units participate in battle in two ways. They can attack or support. Troops are only allowed to attack. Generals, planes, and tanks can only support. You roll dice and determine the number of hits against the enemy. Supporting units may give you additional dice, or they may, which is planes, or they may give you pluses, well, modifiers to the die roll. Generals and tanks. At the beginning of a battle, units can be withdrawn from the box and placed in this, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. Just in order to make it easier to understand how the combat is working. Okay. First, you select a specific combat unit that you want to attack with, and a unit of the defenders that you want to defend against your attack. These are not change. These are step units. You can't break them down and exchange them, even though they feel kind of like that in some ways. That's something I need to clarify there. It's actually mentioned. A unit can only attack once per turn. Once it's attacked, you should probably, I don't know, tilt it or something like that. There's a used units box here if you're using the battle aid chart, so that should be pretty good. You can attack the same defending unit again and again and again, or you can choose to attack different defending units. Okay, the attacking and defending units can then be supported by friendly generals, tanks, and planes. The attacking player first decides which units in the same box are supporting the attack. There's no limit to the number of units that can support an attack, but each supporting unit can only participate once per turn. And when the attacking player has chosen all his supporting units, now the defender gets to react with his own support. Planes add a number of dice indicated on the plane counter. So this says +1. This says 0. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong number. This says 2. This says 1. I believe this is the air versus air battle modifier. Let's see. That's not easy to glance at there. Yeah, air dare modifier for air combat and combat strength. Sure. Okay. All right. So where are we here? Generals and tanks give a die roll modifier to the combat result, and you'll see like this has a +2 on it. Some of the generals have not very good combat modifiers, like -1. Okay. But remember, you need a general to attack, so after a supporting unit has participated, it gets flipped over to indicate it's used. Play cards for combat support. At this point, you're allowed to play cards. All cards have 2 distinctive lower sections. One to support a friendly attack on the bottom left, and I'll show you an image of a card. Here's the image of a card, just like there. Okay, so they do not show what they look like. I don't want to reshuffle, but basically they have these modifiers on the 2 sides of the card. And you can declare that you're going to support the attack by using the bottom left, or disrupt the attack by using the bottom right. And it's usually clear which one you want to use, because you're either the attacker or the defender. Supporting the friendly attack adds more dice to the die roll. Or gives a modifier, and penalties work the same way with a negative modifier or subtracting dice. Before rolling dice, starting with the attacker, each player can use 1 card for combat support. If you choose to do so, you must select one of the cards from your hand. You place it face down. You announce whether you're using it as a bonus or penalty. Now that seems a little weird, right? They can affect your own die roll or the opponent. So, support a friend. So here's the problem. I think the way it's worded, but they're not very good with the precision of the wording in this, and it may have to do with it being written originally as a Spanish game and then translated. I think the intention here is you can bonus your own attack, attack is the wrong word here. Your own, I don't know what to call it, your own damaging die roll, as it were, the roll that you're trying to hurt the other person with. Or you can protect your unit by putting a negative on the opponent. It's not just an attacker-defender thing. So I was wrong there. But unfortunately, I've faced a number of cases where the rules say things that are worded incorrectly, but you can kind of figure them out with a little thought after you read through it. It is a little bit of a headache, though. Now, here it says, once all cards, if any, have been played. Well, I think that's limited to 2 because of the way this is stated. But again, each can use 1 card for combat support. But that could be meant to be alternating. I don't think it is, because you could build up too big a modifier that would cause real problems. So I think you're actually each only allowed to play 1. So then it's once all cards, but no more than 2 total. Okay. At this point, if there are planes involved in the battle on both sides, there's an air combat phase. The air combat, you're going to pair the planes off against each other on a one-for-one basis. The defender gets to decide how the pairings are made, and any leftover planes are going to be able to fly air support without being hindered. The ones that succeed in sticking around will still be able to fly air support. The air battles, you roll a number of dice shown on the plane counter, which is going to be either 1 or 2, which I guess is the same number that you used for their combat. And then you add the die roll modifier for the plane combat, I guess. Yeah. The die roll modifier is applied to only one of the dice. Event cards, to prevent you from being able to do 2 hits more easily. The event cards can't be used on these. The combat's simultaneous. If you roll a 6 or more, the enemy opposing plane is just destroyed, and it'll be removed from the game, and they say permanently, so I guess there's no way for it to come back in. And it won't provide ground support from the dead. If you roll a 5, the opposing plane has been knocked out for ground support. It's turned over to used. Anything else still allows it to do ground support. In the case of a 2-strength plane, you can choose the most favorable die as to which one hits. And of course, if you have a modifier, you'd choose to put the modifier on that most favorable die, because you just need 1 hit to do anything. Okay, then you figure out the number of dice that you're going to roll, which is the combat strength of the unit, plus dice from support, plus any bonuses or penalties from support of different types. You roll the dice. Any die roll result of 5 or more after applying any DRMs is considered a hit. Negative modifiers must be always applied to the highest die roll. Positive modifiers can be applied to any die after the roll is made, as selected by the person who's making the die roll. This could be important, because the limitation on the negatives means that the person trying to resist being hurt is got a lot less control over the situation. The modifiers can't be split. If you have a +2 die roll modifier from a tank unit, it must go to a single die roll. You can't split it between 2 dice. Okay, so you're trying to roll 5s and 6s for hits, which isn't specified here, but it is, I think, no, maybe not. But it is somewhere else, early in the rules. Should be here. Hits are applied to the opposing unit. Troops receiving any hits will be reduced or destroyed based on steps for the number of hits they get. Each one's 1 step. You go from 5 to 3 to 2 to 1 to dead. You have to apply all the hits if possible, but they only apply to the 1 unit you're schwacking. After applying the hits, the counter may need to be exchanged. You have to maintain the same troop type if possible. If there's no units of the required type, you must change it to a regular army unit. If there's no regulars, it's changed into militia or phalangists or Carlists. Those tend to be shitty. We have the different images here. Anarchist militia, communist militia would count. There's the regular army. These guys have -1s. Phalangist and Carlist militia, regular army. I think if you're somehow out of regular army and out of your militias, you're probably screwed, but we shouldn't be able to see that. I doubt that'll happen. Okay. Tanks supporting a battle are eliminated if the supported unit is destroyed, or if all the friendly troops are gone at the end of the battle. Planes that have no friendly troops in their box after the battle will be withdrawn from the map and returned to the player's mat. If the box has no units from either side left for some reason, the attacker has won the battle and gets a flag in it. I mean, he paid for the attack. Okay. After applying any hits on the support units, those support units will be turned over. They won't be available at all for the rest of the turn. Republican tanks are weird, though. They aren't shaded. They have nationalist tanks on the other side because there's an optional rule to capture Republican tanks. I don't know what to do about that. I guess I put something on them to mark them as used. I can put them in the box or whatever. The problem with putting them in the box is if both players have leaders in the space, there could be another battle in that space. And those tanks are used, so there should be a way to mark that. I assume they're not super tanks that can be used twice just because they have nationalist ones on the back. The rules don't really go into that. If an attacking unit will not be available for future combats during the same turn, however, the attacking player may now choose a different unit and start another attack in the same box. He can attack as many times as he has units that he wants to attack with. And then during the opposing player will be allowed to initiate a combat too, and those attacking units that were used will still be available to be defending units in that battle. Remember, you're only allowed one leader per space, so once that leader is used up for the turn, you will not be launching another attack from that space. So you attack with as many units as you want, and then you're done. Okay. Once all attacks have been resolved, the turn passes to the opposing player if he has pieces left. Otherwise, the generals left that he can trigger. Okay, the upkeep phase. We're going to pause soon. Both players must withdraw from the map all their planes and generals, and they go back over on their player aid. And tanks are allowed to stay on the map. They must. All used units get flipped over so they can be used again. The objective cities chart has to be calculated. There are a total of 12 objective cities. And why do we have them split 4, 4, 4? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Very interesting. Each player counts the number of objective cities he controls and changes the OC marker. The counter for contested cities must all... here's the contestants. That's why. Must also be checked and changed accordingly. The sum of the three values is always 12. And then victory conditions are checked. The automatic victory is over here. We'll talk about that. More than 7. Okay, so here you need all of the following. You need more than 7 of, i.e. 8, of the regions of the victory point cities, whatever, goal cities. I don't remember what they're fucking called. OCs. Can't fucking remember. You give me these little 2-letter acronyms and I can't remember shit about them. The opposing player doesn't? Okay. So, any of the following conditions. So you have more than 7 OCs, you win the game. I thought it was hard. If the opposing player doesn't have units or markers in at least 8 connected boxes, these boxes don't have to be OCs and they can be either friendly or contested. Well, that's one where the wording had me confused reading it, but now I see it's obvious how it must be. You must have pieces or control of 8 connecting spaces somewhere on the board. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? But it could be worded to, it could be parsed to be, well, I don't have it in some set of 8, in which case the game is over and both sides have won already. Okay, if you control Madrid, Barcelona, and Seville, and Seville is here, Barcelona up here, Madrid there. If the nationalist controls Madrid before turn 4, if the Republican has combat units in more than 3 objective cities at the end of turn 10, the indication here is that that's World War II, and the Republicans are still in a position where Allied support, where Western Allied support would help them win the revolution, the Civil War. Okay, let's jump back and take care of the last couple of things here, and then finish up the victory conditions for when the game ends. Okay, the event phase is the only time you can play your cards, and they're pretty self-explanatory. First the nationalist, and then the Republican is able to play up to 3 cards for their events, and you just trigger them, and there's nothing too exciting to say. There's a little bit here of clarifications, but nothing important. Okay, the replacement phase. This is carried out on each of the R turns. You're going to get replacement points for each objective city that you control, +1 for each contested objective city. And reinforcing a unit on the map by 1 step costs you 1, and bringing new units into play costs you 1. Whoever has the least must spend 1 to do one of those things. If they have the same amount, the nationalists go first, and they alternate until only 1 player has them left. Reinforcing means you flip something up a step. Replacements can only be spent in supplied boxes, and no more than 1 spent per box. So you may only reinforce a unit 1 step or add a new unit, but you cannot do both in the same box. Okay. There are limits based on the turns. On turn 1, you can bring into play 1 strength units and reinforce a 1 strength unit to a 2 strength unit. And most of the units on the board are 1 strength at this point, so that's not that big a limitation. On turns 3 and 5, you can bring into play a 2 strength unit. That's just 1 replacement point to do. Or reinforce a 1 or 2 strength unit. On 7 and 9, you can bring into play 2 strength units, but you can reinforce 1, 2, or 3. And when changing 2 for 3, you have to maintain the unit type. However, if there are none available of the same type, you may choose a different 3-strength unit as long as certain conditions are met. The Republican can only spend on regular army, Basque, communist militia, and anarchist militia. The nationalists can only spend on regular army and phalangists. Notably, you can't spend your replacement points from Spanish cities on building Italian units or Communist International or anything like that. Nor on legionnaires, Army of Africa, or Carlists. Basques are limited to only coming in Bilbao or San Sebastian. And you have to mark which spaces have been reinforced by each side. And again, maybe that's tilting, maybe that's putting cubes, I don't know. Okay, back to the victory conditions. If the game makes it to the end of turn 10, how do you win? Whoever has the most objective cities. If they both have the same amount, the game's a draw. All right, we're going to take a pause there because I'm pooped. Okay, let's start hitting the optional rules, which I'm going to use quite a few. 3 of the 5 Republican generals have special rules on them. Lister, Durruti have an emblem on the top for political background. Got Lister here. She's got a little communist marker. That's not really at the top. Looks at the bottom to me. Barry is someone else. I don't know who this other one is. He's probably on the board somewhere. There he is. And he's got the anarchist symbol. If any of these generals is in a battle where they don't have a unit of the same emblem, there's a -1 die roll modifier applied to Republican die roll. which means that they can't commit those units because they might lose them then. You know, they can't commit them till late in the battle, basically. And Ulabari can only initiate a battle if he has whatever. I think these are the Basques. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Republican tanks. If they're destroyed after a battle, the nationalist player rolls a die. On a 4 or more, the tank is captured, and it flips over. And then it's placed on a nationalist control box. It'll be usable by them for the remainder of the game until it dies, I assume. There's a couple of cards that are optional. They're in the decks as far as I'm concerned, so I'm not going to worry about them. They're probably ahistorical. Fog of War. Only be able to see the top unit. I'm going to kind of play with this, just to say I'm not going to be pawing through the stacks. You're also allowed to use up to 5 of these as dummies in stacks. I'm not going to worry about that kind of shit. You know, I'm just not going to paw through my opponent's stacks. San Sebastian. If the Republican controls San Sebastian, it becomes a port. Well, we're up here. I doubt I'll remember this, and it can be used to bring new units into play. This is the northern border passes with France being available. Okay, these next two are options. No foreign intervention prevents a number of the foreign cards from taking play, and then the historical variant pre-programs the deck so that it follows a more historical path. I'm not going to touch either of those. I might see things getting fairly perturbed because of that, but that's okay. For me, for one thing, I don't know enough about the Spanish Civil War to really be able to critique, oh yeah, this is unbelievable, you know. Where you're going to see things like that is only where I see things where the rules seem to belie believability, not where, oh, there's no way that, you know, the Republicans could have been turned back that easily, I think. Although I do have enough knowledge, and the designer seems to actually agree with this, to say, you know, the Republicans actually had a lot of things going against them. So while they may have started out kind of stronger, holding the reins of government, etc., there were some baked-in problems, especially with once they started working with the Communist international forces, which kind of hindered them in ways that I don't think that the game is going to, the way the write-up is, I don't think that the game is going to represent them all that well. But we'll see. Maybe the cards can manage it. Maybe there's enough limitations. Certainly the special rules on the Republican leaders is going to help a little bit. Okay, the naval rules. So there aren't a whole lot of naval rules here. We have basically, it looks like 2 pages of rules. But, as is always the case, my mind kind of blurs out when I start reading the naval rules to a game. And they shouldn't be that bad here. A number of units are already placed on the board to support the naval variant. And I believe all the naval cards are in the decks. I just shuffled the year cards. Okay, so for the first 5 turns of the game, both sides get an extra card to simulate the period where the navies were still, you know, both contesting better. Now, the sequence of play sends the ships out to movement right after the draw phase. Then they're going to fight right after the combat phase. They might have some effects during upkeep. And you're allowed to play an extra event card when the naval rules are in play. Okay. So, there are naval bases. The Nationalists have El Ferrol and Cadiz. Okay, where the fuck's El Ferrol? They tell me. Near La Coruna. I feel like La Coruna's up here. Unfortunately, my knowledge of Spanish geography is not perfect, so I'm looking for La Coruna. I expect it to be, oh, there it is. Okay, so, I see, it's here. And it's associated with that space. And the Republicans have it in Cartagena. It's here near Murcia. Naval bases are where your damaged ships go, or if you withdraw from a battle. But it can only be used as long as the enemy doesn't control the space it's associated with. If a ship's damaged and the owning player has no bases, the ship goes to a friendly port. If you're in a friendly port, they can only be repaired through cards, never with replacement points. It does not say anything about if you regain the naval base that you'll be able to flee back to it with your damaged ships. So I don't think you can do that. Once they're in a port, they're kind of screwed. There's no limit to the number of naval units that may ever occupy one unit or box. Also, what's not covered is what happens if you lose control of the area that the naval base is in. I don't know. I really don't know. These rules were not as carefully written. They were added only for the English version. Naval bases, yeah, okay. Republicans have some cards that affect naval unit assignment. The Republican player cannot assign units to the Cantabrico naval area unless he has at least one unit in a port. That's up here. Okay. You can assign up to 2 planes to naval operation areas or to port boxes during movement. You can only assign them if you control a land box within 3 of the target area. Well, I'm not sure what that means, like the Baleares. What is within 3 of the Baleares? I don't know. I don't know. Yep. Okay. No planes can be assigned to the Mediterranean, which makes sense. But here, I mean, I just don't know. Is this one? Is this one? You know? Up here? It's not clear. Here, is this connecting to it? Again, where connects here? I guess what I'm going to do is say the Baleares are adjacent to everything along the Med. This is adjacent to, I guess, everything. I don't know. I just don't fucking know. It's just not spelled out. Yeah. Okay. During the first turn, no planes can be assigned naval operations except for the Nationalist Junkers 52, which is already applied to a naval space. Coastal boxes. Any land box touching a sea zone is a coastal box. Now, when they say box, they mean these circles. Naval units in a coastal box may provide support to our friendly ground units during the ground combat phase by contributing with dice or DRMs to the combat, just like supporting planes or tanks do. Naval combat in coastal boxes. If there's naval units in both sides of a coastal box, a battle will ensue. This will be handled like air combat. We'll get to the naval battle rules, which are later. A modified die roll of 6 or more damages the ship. A damaged ship must turn to its gray side and withdraw to a friendly naval base. A die roll result of 5 will force the ship to be withdrawn. Destroyer squadrons will add a +1 DRM as support units, which can also be used to support ground combat. That seems a little weird to me. I would assume the big ships could support ground unit. I'm not sure destroyers should be terribly valuable at that. But again, submarines cannot be used to support ground combat. However, they can engage in naval combat. Ground supporting planes do not engage in air-sea battles against ground supporting ships. Can I throw planes into the naval battle? Again, not clear. Can those planes be associated with the coastal space at all? I guess not, but I'm absolutely uncertain. Naval units and planes may be assigned to port boxes even if there are no friendly ground units in it. However, these units may not engage in combat with enemy ground units, nor do they gain control of the box. They're attempting to blockade. Planes are assigned during the movement phase. Players, when they normally would be. Players may assign planes and naval units to friendly ports to protect it against an enemy blockade. If opposing units are in the same port, a combat will occur. If it's only ships, a naval combat takes place. If there's only air units, an air combat takes place. If there are both, an air-sea battle takes place. If any enemy unit remains after combat resolution, the port is under blockade. That seems to include just planes. Blockaded ports may not receive reinforcements that are brought into play through the use of event cards. Now, the likelihood that you would be using your planes to blockade a port on their own or whatever seems a little low, so I'm not sure I'm going to be, in terms of game viability, I feel like those planes are going to be too useful to waste on that. However, it looks like it's allowable. The port boxes of Murcia, Cadiz, and La Coruna are considered to have permanent defenses of 3 dice. Is this written anywhere? Nope. So sorry. So maybe we remember this, maybe we don't. This permanent combat value and a +1 ARC DRM. This permanent combat value is used only if the enemy units attempt to blockade the box. They may not be reduced through naval or air combat in any way. Ships in a naval base can never be blockaded. Naval combat and I'm almost tempted to just say the naval rules should just be thrown out because they're so undeveloped. Each operations area has 2 colored boxes where units of each side may be placed for the naval operations. Blue for nationalist, red for Republican. Each shows an effect that will be implemented if you control the area. So like this, no movement allowed from Marucos to Cadiz. That's, I believe, if the red owns it. Here, as long as blue controls it, the movement's allowed. But where's Maruca? Maruca's over here, yeah. So I guess you have to control this in order to do it. I'm not sure, because these two, these two are, opposites of each other. And what if there's no control? Here, nationalist player draws 1 card less. That would make sense if the Republicans controlled it. Bilbao and Oviedo may not be used as ports. Well, I'm not sure Republicans need ports, but presumably they do. I thought it was a little odd that the nationalists would not be able to use that. Republican player receives 1 additional replacement point. That's if the Republicans control it. Barcelona may not be used as a port. Republican player receives 1 replacement point less. I'm pretty sure Barcelona and the Baleares are next to each other. The question is, you know, hey, maybe these four are, and these guys aren't. Republican player draws one extra card and may play one extra event. Nationalist player draws one extra card and may play one extra event. I think that's all. Okay, let's go back to what? Naval combat itself. It's only, okay, in a naval operations area, it's only initiated if both players agree. If someone declines combat and the other person wants it, the declining player has to retreat and give up control. The naval combat, if both players have planes in the area, use standard air combat before the naval battle. Any surviving planes can then attack enemy ships in an air-sea battle. Non-supporting planes are turned over, but are not returned to the owning player map. To resolve a naval combat, opposing ships must be first paired against each other. This combat will be done on a one-for-one basis. The side with the more ships decides how the pairings are made. Leftover ships are used to support additional naval combat. The naval battle is resolved like a standard air combat, applying the RC DRM, the white circle of each unit after the die roll. A modified die roll of 6 or more damages the ship. A damaged ship must turn over to its gray side and withdraw to a friendly base. If you're hit twice in the same combat, you are destroyed. A die result of 5 will force the ship to be withdrawn to a friendly naval base, leaving immediately. A squadron of destroyers can support a friendly ship or submarine by adding +1 DRM. A supporting destroyer squadron may not contribute with the air-sea combat DRM. Here's a destroyer. It's got the +1 DRM is, I guess, the black. The air-sea DRM is the white circle, which is shitty. Submarines engaged in naval battle are not paired. Rather, they first roll against a ship of the player's choice, modified by the sub-air CDRM, or by supporting destroyers. If the attacked ship is neither hit nor withdrawn, the ship makes the die roll against the submarine as well. No event cards affect naval combat. You can't use their modifiers on them. Once the naval combat's concluded, all undamaged ships and planes remain in the area box. Air-to-sea combat. If one side has only ships and the other has only planes in a box, then there's an aero-naval phase. Now, this is a little weird. It sounds like you don't do the air-naval phase unless there are no ships supporting those planes. That doesn't seem reasonable. The player with the planes totals the strength of his units and rolls that many dice, applying air combat DRM's white circle. A modified roll of 6 or more damage, a modified roll of 5 forces the ship to be withdrawn. The player with ships must roll 1 die per naval unit, regardless of their combat value. The die roll is modified based on the air combat DRM on the thing. Now, the sub has no numbers on it, so I don't know. And somehow is able to knock planes out of the air easily, I guess. Okay. The biggie of this next section is getting those controls. And they're fairly clear. The control marker will stay in the area as long as no enemy moves into the area. If the Mediterranean is not controlled by a player, however, both effects are implemented. Well, here they say this, or the Republican card N6 are played. I'm assuming that N6 makes the Mediterranean open to both, and you can't contest it anymore, but who knows? We'll see how it's worded in whether that makes sense. If there are units on both sides of the Estechio, the nationalist player will only be able to move 1 unit from Morocco to Cadiz and 1 unit from Morocco to Sevilla at the end of the update phase. So that would limit him a little. What does it mean if there's no units at all here? I don't know. Again, it's not specified. Damaged ships may not be assigned nor participate in battle. Destroyed ships are removed from the game. A damaged ship can be repaired by spending 1 replacement point. Destroyed ships may only be brought back into play through event cards. And that is it. Other than the naval rules, everything seems kind of clear. I knew that the naval rules kind of turned my brain to mush, and I kind of see why, looking at them through the camera lens at this point. They are not ready for prime time. It looks like they were kind of slapped together and not fully developed. In the sense that the rules weren't nailed down the way the ground rules appear to be nailed down pretty well. But we always want to play the most advanced version of something. So, since we're only going to look at this once, we'll see how much they damage the game. Mainly they're just going to frustrate me, I think. And I'll come up with some kind of way of handling them. All right, let's send this up.